Chris Show Underground. Once again, bringing to light what the dark powers keep hidden. And now, Mr. Chris.
Shadow. How does the dictionary define shadow? Well, there's a couple definitions. One of them is shade, as in an area, dark figure, or to cast an image on the ground. But interestingly enough, the dictionary also has an adjective, without official authority, in quotes, a shadow government. So what exactly is a shadow government? Does it exist? Is it even possible? Well, there's been reference to such theories in many ways, in many places. The Seventh Floor group we've heard about, and other factions and factors. But is it real? When did it start? Is it possible that it exists now? Is it possible that it has ties with previous presidents, perhaps in the 60s? Well, we are going to find out about that. We are speaking once again with Mr. Estas K. Brown, and we are diving deep, deep, deep into the rabbit hole. And it's going to be extremely enlightening. And as we get closer, the other side doesn't want us talking about this and is doing everything they can to stop it. But truth ultimately cannot be stopped. And we're going to be speaking with Mr. Estas K. Brown right here as soon as we get back on the Mr. Chris Show Underground.
The views expressed on the Mr. Chris Show are not necessarily those of Mr. Chris, his guests, sponsors, advertisers, or broadcast providers. The content provided by the Mr. Chris Show is intended solely for the purpose of entertainment. Reference to any persons, places, objects, or ideas is strictly coincidental. Everything presented herein is the exclusive copyright of the Mr. Chris Show.
Before we drop down deep into the rabbit hole of truth and hidden truth and look at the shadow government with Mr. Estas K. Brown, my supporters wanted me to make a brief statement about the last episode where there was a small altercation at the end of that episode that had to be dealt with. Myself and my team did deal with it, and after a few weeks of R&R, everything's okay. Thankfully, just some flesh wounds, nothing I have not experienced before. And we believe that the security now has been improved. However, the other side is always doing their best, of course, in this game of chess. So that being said, let's go down into the rabbit hole and let's talk to Mr. Estas K. Brown about the shadow government and the state secrets and all kinds of fascinating information tied to that. So, Mr. Brown, are you with us on the line here? Can you go ahead?
Hello, Mr. Chris. I can hear you loud and clear, and I'm most definitely glad to hear that you're okay. You made it out well, and I'm glad to be back and ready to start talking about what I've got to say.
Okay, well, as you know, the deeper we get to the bone, that the other side is very interested to get to both of us. So that kind of tells you something, really. But in this segment, I want to speak with you about what you were telling me about in light context before, the shadow government. So why don't you go ahead with that?
Correct, Mr. Chris. So the shadow government, essentially what has been referred to as the mythical fourth branch of the United States government, Many people do not believe in its existence. Many people do not believe that it's possible for such an organization to even exist. But as I've mentioned to you before, it does exist, which currently in its form does have some international contacts at this point in time. But to start off, the shadow government was born out of the need to plug a hole that essentially all foreign countries had realized or discovered was one of the United States' greatest flaws. And what would that be? I mean, for all intents and purposes, the American form of democracy has been considered the perfect government for the entire world, the model for which to build other countries around it. However, the greatest fallacy here is essentially the lack of a consistent foreign policy.
Right.
Foreign policies that other countries have learned to exploit, and either waiting or just slowing down using the diplomatic approach, whatever tactic they so chose to use. All they would do, and again, is just wait for the next administration to come in. So, hence the need for a consistent foreign policy to exist if we were going to be the one form of government here to try and set the example for all other governments to continue to function. It was born out of the need after World War II. Many people around the world, many foreign leaders, many governments concluded that the birth of a world leader like Hitler came out of such a fallacy for such a large country, a powerful country like the United States, to refuse to participate.
Right.
In controlling leaders like that, and to the point to where they got so powerful that it required quite a few countries in the world to actually join together and fight.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the mistake in World War II early on, was underestimating the Axis powers and Hitler. And I think that Hitler was seen as somebody who probably wasn't going to go too far, was not going to do much to upset the world, and they just, of course, underestimated him. So I can understand that.
I mean, one thing you have to understand, world leaders like Hitler had their goal, but at the same time, the Illuminati used people like him to manipulate them to help them instantiate their goal, which again has always been the creation of a one-world government. So they've always manipulated, and it's usually financially. The Illuminati control system here has always financed. They have always financed both sides of a war. You have to keep that in mind. Whomever was considered the enemy, whoever was considered a friend, they have always financed both sides of the war, and they have always come out ahead.
Well, let me ask you on the shadow government, though. Now, do we? I know it's specifically called the shadow government, but do we see any players in the media to this, or is this really completely hidden from view?
Well, you have to keep in mind the media has always been a tool, whether from the Illuminati, again, the Illuminati at some point in time, not being so powerful as they have grown to be over the years, have always had a need to manipulate, and usually media is a good way to try and do so. However, not having been organized as they are today, they've had to do with whatever mainstream media tools were available to them. You have to keep in mind that during World War I and World War II was their opportunity to really to have them really set their control mechanisms in place in Europe. And once that was established, then the larger part of the plan was to try and incorporate the United States into that. And so you have to understand that the United States, even in its inception, has always been part of a master plan that has been in the works for, I'd like to say, thousands of years, culminating into what we have now. But getting back to the shadow government, it was born roughly around 1947, 1948-ish. Some say it came out as a need to address what was discovered in the 1947 Roswell crash, but that could be an entirely different point of debate. But what I'm here to tell you is that its creation started roughly about 1947 here.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely familiar with the media and such, and I don't really go much into my background with you, Mr. Brown, but I think you know that years ago I used to be more, let's say, involved with the mainstream media back when we had studios in Burbank, California, and then having to move and various things. But I could see the writing on the wall, and I could see how they maneuver and do things to pull the rug out from under you. So, and finally in the underground here, I'm not connected to anything, which is allows us to speak freely about these things.
Yeah, precisely, and that's the reason, the whole reason for me agreeing to come talk on your show. The clandestine nature of it, it actually gives us more time to try and disseminate the message that I've been trying to get across before we actually get caught.
Right, which it seems to be something we're always having to worry about. But anyway, back to this shadow government. So starting, you said 47 or 48, right around there, and I assume that it has, of course, become stronger over the decades.
Correct. Again, keep in mind that at this point in time, 1947, 1948, the Illuminati and the United States shadow government were two totally different groups with different intentions here.
Okay.
The shadow government just being focused here within the United States, their plan was, again, just to solidify the United States government's foreign policy. And that's been their whole intention, to ensure what Pentagon or the military-industrial complex decided to try and implement with respect to controlling or policing the world.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know that, after World War II, then we had other opportunities for conflicts. The Korean War, of course, the war in Vietnam, Desert Storm, and the more recent conflicts in the Middle East, of which I'm actually associated with, and in some ways, due to my veteran status. But so this was actually being then in force and in play all the way through, let's say, Vietnam.
Mr. Chris, you have to understand that it's a different era. What you experienced from 1947, 1948, when the shadow government was first instantiated. There is a period upon which the intent here was to create the unelected fourth branch of the American government, that which has been hidden from the American public, those that really run the country. Mm-hmm. What you experienced from that point on forward was the instantiation of the worldwide control mechanism, the UN being a large part of that, the UN being the part that really is the legal aspect of being able to push their system of control across the world. In the beginning, yes, it was communism versus democracy. Once the Soviet Union disappeared, then a boogeyman needed to be created. So now we're talking about the infinite war on terror. But again, we are talking about a totally different era. And we'll get to that portion. But for now, I think the more important side is, again, going back to the military-industrial complex that first set up the shadow government of the United States.
If you can hold that thought, Mr. Brown, we have to take a break. We'll be right back. And then I want to get into what is known as the secrets of the infrastructure. And I know you have a lot of info about that. So we'll get to that when we get back here on the Mr. Chris Show Underground.
Time travel does indeed exist.
Your child will be taken into the center at the age of 5 and kept until the age of 10. And that is not voluntary.
No way she's going to go into one stupid government-sponsored re-education camp.
Years ago when they started doing this, so it was Roe versus Wade. We had to make it legal to take a human life and get stem cells from it. We didn't have any other way to do it at the time. Therefore, we had the raw material to work with.
Personally handwritten to you from the President of the United States, who we hope by that time will be Hillary.
What you're about to see happen in the Middle East is the economic viability of the region changing hands.
What happens in your future is the Earth shifts its axis. The oceans freeze over. There's no more room for anybody. The population of the world is reduced to 50,000. It's time for the real truth, the Mr. Chris Show, Mr. Underground.
Well, the shadow government, that's one thing, but now I want to know about something else that you were mentioning before, which are the state's secrets and the infrastructure, and I'm familiar with that, being involved in the military at one point, but why don't you explain it?
Well, Mr. Chris, the state secrets infrastructure was created, obviously out of the need to keep things a secret, but it was essentially modeled from an age-old system here. And that's where we go back into Freemasonry. So if you're familiar with Freemasonry, they have an infrastructure in place to where when you first start, you start off at a specific entry level, a level 1. Essentially, you're given your one stripe, and you rise levels within Freemasonry based on your level of contribution and your willingness to participate within the group. It's widely known that there are up to 33 levels within the Freemasonry hierarchy. the 33rd level being the highest level. And obviously those are the ones that are most willing to participate within their group alliance there, and essentially willing to do anything that it takes. Well, the state secrets infrastructure was kind of created in a much similar fashion here. It's widely rumored that there are 17 levels of security clearance there. 17 referring to Q clearance because it's the 17th letter in the alphabet. Which there are only a handful of people, or very few people, that can reach that level. It was rumored that when the atomic bomb was created, that was the highest level of the state's secrets infrastructure that a person can achieve, upon which it's either military personnel that have in-depth knowledge of those the nuclear weaponry, or the research scientists that actually put it together, as well as the President of the United States. Every president sworn into power is automatically given this Q clearance level.
17th level.
The 17th level. But you have to understand, from the bottom up, you've got your secret, you've got your top secret level, and then you've got what's called the SCI level, secure compartmented information levels. And essentially as the acronym describes, it's this compartmentalization that allows for all of these differing types of clearances there, and it's essentially on a need-to-know basis. Because of that, there are clearance levels that are outside the scope of the President of the United States. In essence, if you want to refer to it as levels higher than the President of the United States. Not every president is informed of everything or has the ability to even ask about particular programs that are outside of their scope because of these SCI levels. So it is widely rumored that with the existence of the SCI infrastructure, that there's an additional 16 levels, strangely equaling those of the Freemasonry level. So there's a total of 33 levels. One thing I also wanted to
actually in gematria, the Jewish study of numbers is a power number, by the way, 33.
It is, but within Freemasonry, it is also linked to one other religious figure, and that just so happens to be the age of Jesus Christ when he died at the cross.
Right.
And it's widely believed that that's why there are 33 levels within Freemasonry. Now here, I honestly, I firmly believe that the state's secrets infrastructure was created to really mimic Freemasonry, because again, it's on a need-to-know basis. There probably are some people that have the highest level of clearance, but even those people probably do not know what all of the other levels are doing at any one point in time. And perhaps there are. But,
because unfortunately, if you did know all the secrets, that also makes you an asset that might have to be dealt with at some point.
Correct. So, I mean, the CIA, again, constitutionally, they cannot operate within the United States borders. However, that kind of opens up like a legal loophole for them. There's nothing to stop them from manipulating someone into doing their bidding. And how would they normally do that? Well, I guess I kind of like to offer an example. What we're currently seeing right now, at least when I turn on American mainstream media news, I see right now a president of the United States that is attempting to take down the deep state or Illuminati infrastructure. And we're talking about an institution here within the United States that is trying their darndest, their hardest to try and prevent that from happening. And what I see happening now, I do see groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter essentially kind of a civil rights movement of sorts. And if you stop and think, when was the last time we had some kind of major civil rights movement?
As I remember...
a major one. I'm talking about something with a nationwide impact.
Yeah, as I remember from history, that would be, I believe, Martin Luther King Jr.
Precisely. That's precise. So that's in the 1960s. Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Chris. Who was president of the United States during that era?
That would be JFK, I believe.
And what happened to JFK?
Well, I could give you two answers. One answer is that he was assassinated by a deranged person. The other would be a conspiracy theory, I am told.
Correct, in which the CIA somehow manipulated someone into assassinating the President of the United States. But one thing to keep in mind, JFK at that point in time was also dead set in unmasking and destroying the deep state infrastructure within the United States. He had become aware of the existence of these secret societies in the United States that had manipulated their control into the shadow government. So the shadow government playbook, in essence, was established. We clearly saw it back then when President Kennedy had grown aware of the existence of the Illuminati and their infiltration units within the United States. Part of their playbook was to unleash, guess what? Civil rights movements. And I think that's abundantly clear with what we're seeing now with President Donald Trump. We're seeing that same playbook being played out for all intents and purposes. It's just a distraction. It's all made done to make the president look bad, through the mainstream media conglomerates. They all form part of that same shadow government infrastructure back then, and now we refer to them as a deep state.
Right. Well, I mean, as far as I know, the last time of recent that we have encountered any Black Lives Matter sort of social unrest was about 4 years ago, leading up to the election of Trump. So if you look, there's a person who does some statistics as far as the keywords in media, social media. You'll see the rise back 4 years ago, and of course you see it now. Kind of funny how it doesn't really matter any other time, but
Yeah, but one thing I did want to emphasize here, specifically with the way the CIA functions within U.S. borders, because as I mentioned, they're expressly prohibited from doing anything within the U.S. borders, is their manipulative nature here. They have the ability to somehow manipulate other groups like FBI participation in helping them out. That way, the CIA has their hands off, but at that point, any kind of discussion or activity with said FBI member is what's classified within the top secret, secure, compartmented information infrastructure. It's on a need-to-know basis. We're talking about programs that even the President of the United States is not aware of. Historically, any president, he can either be brought in on a need-to-know basis or not. but the manipulative nature of the way the state secret infrastructure is set up for the CIA is, again, it gives them plausible deniability. And we go back to the Martin Luther King example. Martin Luther King, and I'm not saying that he was a CIA member, no, but whether he was being manipulated by the CIA for him to be an unwitting participant in the distraction projects is the point that I'm trying to get across. He never really considered himself a CIA agent. I'm not making that statement, but he was being allowed to function, to do what he believed he was born to do, and that's what he did. And when the CIA no longer needed him to continue with his distractions that were obviously being publicized by mainstream media news of the era, when they were done with him after JFK was assassinated, as well as Robert F. Kennedy as well, they ended up assassinating Martin Luther King as well. Their project, their program was over and done with, and they just ended up cleaning up the mess to essentially just eliminate any witnesses that could have testified to that.
I see. Well, I mean, basically, am I reading what you're saying wrong? Because the way I hear it is that the CIA is this shadow government as well.
No, they form a part of it. Now, keep in mind, the shadow government consists of military personnel within the Pentagon, personnel within the United States Congress, your so-called establishment politicians are a key component to that, because they're the ones that help introduce legislation to help push the shadow government's agenda. You have to keep that in mind. They work together in tandem. The CIA is the clandestine tool that they use to help push any agenda that they want. So again, it's a national conglomerate, as I mentioned, the mythical fourth branch of government that no one is aware of, because their existence is hidden within the state secrets infrastructure.
But it sounds like, from what you're describing, the CIA, without the CIA, the shadow government would have a hard time operating.
I guess you can say that, but at the same time, and we'll talk about this, I guess after the break that I assume is coming up shortly. We're talking about the evolution of the shadow government into what we know as the deep state. Now, the deep state now, as we know it, the CIA was created many years ago, even before the whole state secret infrastructure was firmly established. The state secret infrastructure, again, was started within the CIA as the international spy agency. But it wasn't until, and I can't remember, maybe sometime in the 80s, when the National Security Agency was created. Now, again, keep in mind, the CIA is not authorized to operate within U.S. borders, but the National Security Agency is. The Department of Homeland Security, I believe, is part of the National Security Agency.
I see. Well, I mean, the way we're talking about, though, the CIA, it seems like the CIA is integral part of the toolbox being used here. So that was the point I was trying to draw.
Yeah, correct. And if I'm not mistaken, it was also created out of a constitutional declaration, very much like I believe the NSA was. So they were both enabled by the shadow government, essentially.
I see. Well, as you mentioned, we are going to take a break here in a second, and what I wanted to get into would be the deep state. And as we spoke about before, I want to know more about how they were able to infiltrate the shadow government. That's something that has not really ever been explained to me, and I've heard people alluding to it, but that's what we want to cover when we get back to the break. And truth be told, on these breaks, just so the listeners know, we don't have sponsors or anything, but due to the security mechanisms, we have to elect different methods for communication and set those channels up each time, and that actually takes time, but we can only use certain communication channels for a certain time period to be safe, and we've learned that from past experience. So, Mr. Brown, as soon as we get back, I want to dig right into the deep state and the shadow government. And that's on the Mr. Chris Show Underground.
To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency.
Local and state health officials are reassuring the public that there's no reason to panic.
You can trust respected medical authorities.
We are doing everything possible to combat and contain the coronavirus.
This virus is dangerous. This virus is public enemy number one.
President Trump, however, seems too incapable of acknowledging the fact that that overwhelming number of peace protesters are peaceful and are simply advocating change.
In New York City, dozens of looters seen kicking in windows and breaking into stores across Midtown Manhattan.
I'm the president and you're fake news.
It's time for the real truth. The Mr. Chris Show, Mr. Underground.
Well, the last time that we were speaking before, a lot of stuff went on, and all I can say is that the deep state really does whatever it takes. So let's go down into that rabbit hole. So the deep state, I understand, of course, was able to infiltrate the shadow government at what point? And why don't you explain that to everybody?
Well, Mr. Chris, that is a very complicated subject there. There's a lot of history built into it. So there is some knowledge, I'd like to say, required in order to understand it and or believe what I am about to say.
Okay.
And again, I go back to defining who the Illuminati are, and what their beliefs are, and what their ultimate goals have been for technically eons here.
Uh-huh.
Now, it's widely believed that they are just a group of satanic individuals. They practice, the religion of Satanism that has carried along through thousands of years. It's widely believed that their ideology of Illuminism, which they essentially just hide certain key bits of information, certain key bits of technology, certain key bits of science for their own personal gain, so that they can manipulate the world and people the way in which they want to achieve their ultimate goal. And that ultimate goal is a one-world government. So when I say that the United States, or I've mentioned in the past that the United States was an experiment when it was created, that experiment was defined here by Illuminati. Even though it was back in 1776 or even prior to that, the goal was to create a country that would be a beacon for the world, and again, for the sole purpose of eventually helping to lead these Illuminati into the creation of a one-world government.
Wow,
the shadow government.
That I've never heard that angle before. So you're saying that, in a sense, the Illuminati was helping the states over here become established and to fight the British? Is that what I'm hearing?
Not necessarily to fight the British. Again, the Illuminati manipulate people into doing what they need to be done. And here, without really disclosing the full nature of their plans, they have financed, again, wars, they have financed governments, without really telling them what it is that they need them to do, and sort of coaxing them along to get what they need to get done. Here, the United States, again, the intention was to create a perfect government with the intention of later on exploiting it to continue pushing their one world government agenda. So when the shadow government was created, again, American political officials, military officials were manipulated into creating this shadow government because it essentially was needed to help instantiate a more solid world governance, I guess, for lack of better words to try and describe that. Again, through one solid foreign policy established in the most powerful country on Earth, they essentially have been able to manipulate other world governments into becoming what it currently is, or what it was prior to the deep state infiltration, or the Illuminati infiltration of the shadow government to create what we now know as the deep state.
Right. But I'm just getting at that if the colonies here were fighting against the British because the British had different ideas about how to run taxation and the economy and control and everything over here. So that's why I was just trying to clarify. So, I mean, there would have had to have been some support then by the Illuminati through the colonists, maybe through the French, through whoever, to allow the United States to break free from the rule of the British in order to establish the government, because otherwise it was going to continue. The United States would not have been born if things would have just continued.
Correct. But I do also want to highlight that historically, the Freemasonry has been in existence for many years, hundreds of years, if not maybe even 1,000 years. You have to keep in mind that very famous politicians like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, they were all Freemasons, including George Washington. And again, historically, the Freemasons have been a critical part in helping to instantiate the one world government ideology, all based on one thing, equality. What does equality mean, though? It kind of really depends on the sign of the times. Again, if we go back to the discussion that we had with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movements, that vision of equality is what has kind of evolved into what we now know as identity politics, which, as we have seen, has been very divisive and destructive towards the actual concept of equality.
Right.
But getting back to the ideology of the Illuminati here, their ideal form of government is not really a democracy. It's more a socialistic in nature. Why? Because it helps establish a two-tier system here. You've got the general public, and then you have the Illuminati ones. The Illuminati ones are the ones that, again, they hoard all of the knowledge to essentially keep all of what I have come to define as the ignorant or the sheeple in the dark, so that they can just continue to follow their political masters here without really understanding what the full intent is. The deep state, is what I like to say, was born just after the assassination of President Kennedy. JFK, again, had become aware of the existence of the power of all of these secret societies. And he really became aware of that as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Right. He had issues with the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, in giving them orders to get what he needed to get done, which was, as we now know, is to avoid a global nuclear war. He had so many problems in trying to get the military to cooperate with him that eventually, when he found out what was going on, that there were these secret societies that were literally trying to manipulate him into actually coaxing the former Soviet Republic into a global nuclear war, he kind of backed out. He realized that that these secret societies had existed and now infiltrated the shadow government, that he had a plan to destroy them. Part of it was to disband the CIA, and another part of it was also to, I believe, he was looking to disband the Pentagon, and he was just about to sign all of the necessary presidential orders to do so, and that's right around the time that he was assassinated. Shortly after that, the deep state infiltration units started solidifying their control in the absence of his power. That's when they started using the mainstream media as a tool to really manipulate the general American populace into believing whatever it is or whatever it was that little black box was telling them to believe. And from that point on, the deep state just started increasing more. Originally, it was the instantiation of policies that favored the creation of the United Nations. Not only the creation of the United Nations, but also the infrastructure within all foreign countries to abide by United Nations mandates. And over the years, it has grown into what we have seen, to where UN mandates have been used to essentially help us and the CIA declare wars. And we now have seen essentially the entire Middle East with the Arab Spring. We've seen a number of regime changes that have been pushed by these now deep state officials, which again, we're talking about CIA programs that exist through the state secrets infrastructure, all commanded by, not just by the United States military industrial complex, but also all of the global corporations here that whenever they need to have some kind of business decision pushed through the United Nations, they do so. The CIA manufactures a reason for the United Nations to authorize a war resolution, and we end up essentially sending troops authorized by the UN.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when years and years when Bush was in office, and they would say, "Oh, endless wars, bring our troops home," and then Trump says, "Let's do away with this. Let's have peace. Let's bring the troops home." It's just nobody says anything. It's just whatever, But I mean,
and that's what I find hard to believe. The reasons for manufacturing the war against Iraq, to advance the war against terror, is what most people didn't really buy. And then after the first Iraq War, you had the second Iraq War after 9/11, of which many people didn't understand, well, what does Iraq have to do with 9/11? It really didn't have anything to do with 9/11, so why are we even going to war? Why did the UN even justify any kind of resolution to drum up worldwide support and to go into war with Iraq when they really didn't have anything to do with 9/11? So these are all part of the Illuminati plans to help instantiate a one-world government. And at that point in time, since the Middle East was so far out of control, the intention here was to instill puppet regimes that could be controlled and manipulated by the UN. And that's exactly what 9/11 enabled. Through the Patriot Act, through the endless global war on terrorism, we have been able to clean up any regimes that have not been favorable to the deep state and the Illuminati. And we are where we are now as a result of that. And I think that is a portion that's clearly visible. But what does not make sense here, or at least to some extent it might make sense if you can realize the power of the mainstream media over the American populace.
Yeah, I mean, we both have spoken with enough people and have seen it ourselves, but I mean, the United States mainstream media really pushes the agenda throughout all the world, and like we spoke about before, CNN International and such, but the stories that come out of the mainstream media here are propagated so fast around the world, and of course, no matter how wrong they may be, how opinionated they may be, it's taken as the verbatim truth, and everybody backs it as the verbatim truth, and then, like you say, the sheeple look to that, and it's like, oh well, it's on the news, it must be real. So that's unfortunately the world we live in.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I mean, being outside of the United States, I can see things a little differently, but the effects is still the same. The United States influences the world, and I don't see any change in that no matter where I go.
Well, the United States influences the world, but at the same time, it also, through the Illuminati, they manipulate other countries into doing their bidding. So essentially what the deep state has done is they have created monsters with China, with North Korea, and Russia as well. So you have to keep in mind the world has become a very, very fragile place to live in, specifically because of all the manipulation that has been done for the last 4 or 5 decades after President Kennedy's assassination, into something that's become so unstable that without the deep state control through the UN, if that infrastructure ceases to exist while still leaving these monsters that we have created, these monsters will effectively end the world with their aggressive natures that we have enabled them to build.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, the atomic genie was let out of the bottle. So normally, over history, things could go on. You would have changes. You would have empires come and go. And there could be a loss of life, but it wasn't world-changing, really. But with the atomic genie, That's a totally different place that the world has never been until now.
Yeah, I totally agree, but that can be subject matter for a future episode if we're so lucky to gather again for.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. And you've mentioned this before. At this point, what are people to do? Do we just sit back and watch? What can be done?
In all honesty, Mr. Chris, my whole point in agreeing to these interviews with you was done so with the intention of helping the mass populace open up their eyes to the existence of the Illuminati, as well as their ill intentions. But the way I see things, I don't think that's entirely possible. I think people have been manipulated into believing that they live in the perfect world, with everything being given to them for free, to the extent that even if they flat out came out and admitted it publicly through mainstream media sources, they still wouldn't care. They still would not care. So unfortunately, I think the only outcome here is either one of two. To accept the status quo and allow for the instantiation of a one-world socialist government, and for people to still remain cluelessly under that control and being manipulated and exterminated at will through wars, manufactured pandemics, and so on and so forth. Or the other option is to try and wake up the general populace, the worldwide populace, as to their existence, of which I believe the Illuminati are intent on preventing from happening, up to and including risking worldwide global nuclear war to continue to hide their existence and their ideology of Illuminism.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason. I'm not going to go into it here, and part of the reason why I am where I am, and so on and so forth. And like you, I hope that people can be enlightened, but I doubt it as well. It's just the way it is. But Mr. Brown, unfortunately, we are at the end of this time segment, and due to the secure channels and such, we have to terminate this conversation at this point. But is there next time we would like to talk about perhaps rebuilding? What happens after? Would that work with you?
Most definitely, Mr. Chris. I'd definitely like to enlighten the public on how to recover from one of these two possible scenarios, the only two possible scenarios that I see coming to fruition.
Okay. Well, we will tackle that next time, right here on the Mr. Chris Show Underground.